We're going to address a sharing by this gentleman, Matt Dillahunty, in regards to an argument called the divine hiddenness, and one of its variations called the inconsistent revelations argument. Here we're about to watch Matt introduce it, and then we'll watch an excerpt from a past video where he himself went through at least one obvious rebuttal to it. And then immediately after that, we will delve together even deeper.
Version of the divine hiddenness problem. I think the divine hiddenness category of arguments are among the strongest against the existence of God. One of the versions of divine hiddenness is often referred to as the problem of inconsistent revelation.
But I'm not a fan of it, and you won't hear me use it very often because I was raised Southern Baptist, and we addressed this over and over again. And one of the big ideas is you're making assumptions. You're making assumptions that you could understand what God's plan was. You're like a child and God is like a parent, and the way children would complain that their parents are unfair, it's because they don't understand and they don't know as much as the parent. And you can use this to talk about the problem of evil. Maybe this is the best possible world. Maybe God has us living in what is essentially the best of all possible worlds. You don't know because you're short on information. The argument from divine hiddenness. It's also sometimes referred to as the argument from non-belief. And essentially the argument is, hey, I don't see a God. I don't hear God. I have no way of confirming that there's a God. I see people around me who are claiming that God speaks to them, but most of them don't claim to be hearing an audible voice. They seem to be just kind of getting impressions and giving God credit for this argument, or for the information. I'm told that there's a God who wants a relationship with me, and yet I've sought this out and I've tried to do it the right way, and everywhere I look in the world, there appears to be nothing that leads me to believe that there is a God.
Now, we're going to revisit that last remark in just a moment. But first, we'll address that this argument would have a whole lot more weight, at least so to speak, if it were not at root already written of in the ancient scriptures themselves. Now, Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 reflects that the whole earth had one language and the same words, and then that there was a time where that was divided, where that was confused. That confusing of a language led to different cultures, which led to different beliefs. There are many examples of these different belief systems being pointed out in the Bible, as for example, after Jacob met with Esau, after being apart for some time, he told those in his household to get rid of the quote, foreign gods. Now in a moment, we're going to see proof of the earth indeed being of one language. In other words, of one culture, of one truth. We'll begin with Matt's last remarks that we heard here, and in essence, his request.
Everywhere I look in the world, there appears to be nothing that leads me to believe that there is a God.
Further evidence in previous sharings. Here we see that the calendar which was passed down to Enoch was represented in one of these pyramids, just as the most ancient and what is proven to be the most advanced of knowledge has been embedded throughout the others. The phenomena that takes place at the equinox is held to represent the 7 days of creation. And now here we'll see the parallels, or closer put, the reflection, and how this calendar is represented in this castle, this pyramid.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have numerous documents who are talking about solar calendar, of pre-calculated calendar emerging, commencing in the spring. While the Jewish calendar, known to all of you who are following the Jewish calendar, is starting in the autumn. The current Jewish calendar is starting in the autumn, in the month of Tishrei, while the biblical calendar states explicitly that the calendar starts in the spring. In the book of Exodus 12, we are told that the calendar is commencing in the month of the spring, the first month of the year, where the year is starting as a divine declaration of the beginning of freedom, of the epoch of freedom. It is given up in the time where the story of the departure from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, then there is a calendar introduced, and it is said, this month, the month of the spring, is the head of the year, or the first of the month. You would always start to count from the first month. Is the presence of a solar calendar, a calendar which the writers ascribe to a mythical ancient past. The people who had authored the book of First Enoch, it's called the Ethiopian Enoch because it was first known to us in the language of Giz, which is an Ethiopian language, Semitic Ethiopian language. In the book of Enoch, chapter 72-82, is telling us in great detail on the calendar of 364 days. In the book of Psalms that had been found in Qumran, entirely different genre, you know, Psalms. In the extra Psalms, those which are not known to us in the Bible, in the Psalm scrolls which is presented in the shrine of the book, in column 27 we are told that David, king of Israel, the one who had been described as wise and as poetically gifted and as a prophet according to this scroll, had authored 364 daily songs for each day of the year. He further had authored 52 sacred songs for every one of the Sabbaths of the years. He further authored 18 special songs for the holidays of the year. Now, in entirely different kind of genre, let's say the book of Jubilees, which is para-biblical because it is retelling the book of Genesis. In the book of Jubilees, we are told that Noah had stayed in the ark 364 days, which are divided equally to 4 seasons of 91 days, commencing in the spring. The same is true for the scroll of priestly watches, which is worked on a calendar of 364 days. The same is true to a letter called Miktzat Maaseh Torah, a few observations on the acts of the Torah. The scroll is commencing with a calendar telling us that the first week of the year starts in the spring, and there are 52 weeks in every year, and in each week a different priestly scroll is serving according to a calendar of 364 days. Now, the centrality of the solar calendar could not be exaggerated in the library of Qumran. As I said, in various different genres, in various different literary modes, the centrality of the calendar is put forward. It was a priestly calendar, divided according to the priestly sevenfold divisions. Because if there was anything sacred to the priestly calendar, it was the following assertion: the covenant between God and his people is based on the following fact: every 7 day one should not work on a Sabbath. every 7 holidays of the first 7 months of the year. One must refrain from work according to the biblical law.
What clarity level exists when God is communicating with people? Now, I know some of you are saying, hang on, what the heck did he just say? I mean, why phrase it like that way? How clear can God communicate with humans? Now, if God can communicate a word-for-word sentence, that's awesome. That is a pretty good level of clarity. And if God is all-knowing and more incredibly wiser than the rest of us, you would think that God would know how to communicate with us, his creation, in a way where it should be trivial to communicate a clear sentence. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Can God offer updates? Where's the update?
New interpretations of the text now suggest the entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily a crystal, but a crystalline substance that fit into the palm of a single hand. And when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed and made public, we will see that is the case.
The fourth phase of water, intracellular water, structured water.
Entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance,
A liquid crystal type of water in the cell that facilitates energy and information transfer.
Structure of each one of these planes, you can see that it's a honeycomb, hexagonal kind of structure. Understanding the fourth phase, I think, is the key to unlock the door to understanding of many phenomena.
This connects with the Bible, especially Daniel chapter 7 verses 23 to 25 talks about a fourth kingdom that's different from others and will take over the whole world.
Where's the inspired text from today? Why did it all end after a couple centuries?
this is so powerful. In the book of Daniel, it actually says that the Torah is a code and that the code is sealed until the end of time.
Daniel chapter 7 verses 23 to 25 talks about a fourth kingdom that's different from others and will take over the whole world.
The entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance.
A liquid crystal type of water in the cell that facilitates energy and information transfer.
I've heard from theists that God could only reveal things to people in a way that they could understand at that time. And that makes a little bit of sense. You wouldn't want to tell, and some ancient Israelite tending his sheep who knows nothing about electricity.
Now, though that may have been the case at some points in time, we're about to see proof that was not always the case when it comes to this line. The pyramids around the world correspond to one another, such as like the alignments with the stars. Also, the bodies of water found beneath the pyramids. These streams, these lakes of water, of liquid, are just as much purposeful as they are beautiful. This characteristic in design is found throughout the world, as we are seeing here. For years, it has been said by many that the inside of the pyramids appear to be the inner workings of a masterful work, the mechanics of a power plant. And we are witnessing proof of exactly that. with the walls of these great pyramids being made up of quartz crystal. When a flow of water passes through these underground tunnels and shafts and cavities, it's capable of producing an electrical current known as physioelectricity. As here we can enjoy seeing this crystal clear water, which is as purposeful, as productive as it is beautiful. Same fashion, what is renowned as the Pyramid of the Sun contains lakes of liquid mercury, and the walls themselves, which are laced and carefully impregnated with the crystal known as pyrite, which functions as a conductor of electricity. And once more, in infusing beauty with practical purpose, this perfection is renowned within the candlelight, the torchlight, firelight, to give the appearance, the setting of standing under the stars themselves.
Try to describe the atomic bomb or the internet. There'd be no easy way to actually do that. And so you'd have to be doing it in kind of analogies and metaphors and things like that. And that makes sense. But we aren't those people. We don't have those limitations. So why not reveal stuff to us right now with our current understanding? Why not deliver a message 2.0 that is delivered as a revelation to us now, given our understanding and knowledge now?
Now, given our knowledge and understanding now, when it comes to, quote, modern day science, we're able to see how modern day science is actually catching back up with, or coming back around full circle to being able to show the extents of science's explanation of the creation of our universe, parallel, in other words, match that of the beginnings of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, the first element known to us is hydrogen. The word for hydrogen in Hebrew is mayim, meaning waters. Now, as you see here, the word mayim denotes water, fluid, liquid of just about any kind. As we see here, the extents of science's reach is still completely consistent with the depths of the meanings of waters within Genesis. What may have been thought to solely be poetically placed is shown to be true via scientific proof. As it continues to read, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." And as a hydrogen atom has the appropriate interaction with an electron, this emits light. Furthermore, the 137 constant, the measure of the strength of the electromagnetic force that governs how electrically charged elementary particles and light interact. The number 137 permeates throughout the topic of this process, as light is 137 times faster than an electron. If we look at Genesis, we'll see that the 37th word falls upon the 137th letter, that word being light, and describing the designed function of the 137 constant, as it reads, "God divided the light from the darkness." This extends to the creation constantly going on within our very bodies, as the number 37 is renowned to overlay the inner workings of our genetic code, and our cells, our DNA, communicates at the speed of light and via light. As our cells communicate not only with one another, but ultimately with the quantum fields, the universe, the heavens, all around us. And to make sure it is clear, hydrogen emitting light answers how there was light before the sun, the moon, and the stars on day, or in other words, in phase 4 of the creation, the formation of our universe, of our world. We are able to observe clearly that the extents of modern day science indeed are consistent with the first verses of Genesis. And now we will continue on with the rest of the video that's being answered.
The Bible. Theists will say that the Bible is the Word of God. And what do they mean by it being the Word of God? Is it the literal Word of God? Because if it is, we have big problems. And generally speaking, most serious theologians and thinkers don't ever consider any version of the Bible that we have access to be the literal words of God. Instead, they will point out that the Bible was inspired by God, because if it was literal, and we know there are scribal errors, and we know that we don't have any originals, then we don't have access to the literal word of God. What we have is access to an altered, changed, error-filled version that may have begun with literal words of a God. The other thing is that in addition to scribal errors, you have translations and attempts to understand it. You have, exegesis and things like that, where people are trying their best to convey either what they believe is the accurate message of God or what they think is the best version in their assessment of an accurate message of God. And so we can pretty much set aside that the Bible is the literal word of God. Not the least of which is that most of the people who are saying that are going to be saying it in English while acknowledging that it wasn't originally written in English, assuming they know that much. Others will say that it was error-free in its original form, but we don't have the original form, and that's a problem.
Now, there are a few things to address here, and I'll begin by reminding that there is no, quote, supposed contradiction or error which has not been addressed and shown to be no contradiction or no error whatsoever. This, even after all of the wars, all of the alignments that were a part of ultimately being the confusing of our language, of our understanding. And though we are about to see more proof here that there has been nothing without purpose, if you are counting books written by those who were at war with those who originated the Bible, then of course there you will find contradictions and errors, but ultimately still it is time, by the grace of God, which continues to reveal all truth. Now, earlier we saw proof as to the world being of one language, and we will see further proof of that here soon. Now, to address that earlier it was stated that we do not have any originals left of these scriptures. However, in Zephaniah it reads, "For then will I return to the people a pure language." And as time itself continues to come full circle, Eden to Eden, more than so to speak, as what we have preserved, and with the greater our technology becomes, what we continue to discover and to rediscover and are able to see with a clarity like never before. History aligning with these scientific facts, universally acknowledged as being true, is the return of that pure language which was promised. Here let's delve deeper. We will begin with further proof of the records of Genesis. It is held that after the eating of the fruit of knowledge, that the garden was then regulated to thorns and thistles, and that we would eat bread by the sweat of our brow. There are ancient texts that reflect that as this was being held in the circles and cycles from generation to generation, from civilization to civilization, this full circle from Eden to Eden that you and I are experiencing was always both awaited and strived for since Adam and Eve. As again, these truths reflected and preserved from generation to generation through civilization, ancient texts reveal exactly that. As reflected here, O my brilliant mother, the flower withhold not, text literally supporting the record of Genesis of us eating bread by the sweat of our brow. The garden restore I, a direct reference at the garden being rendered to thorns and thistles, and prior to that last passage, here as we see the shiny ones or the bright ones, the brilliant ones, as it is placed in Genesis, were tending the garden, as these translations reflect, as we see here, the shining ones cleared the ground or felled timber. And now, by the grace of God, we are able to see revelations on how this actually materialized in multiple depths on multiple levels. These gems of truth further solidifies the signature in the stars, the very kisses from God itself. This ancient tablet ultimately translates into the star plow. As it was said earlier, that through generation, through generation, through civilization, this truth has been preserved. Just as with Abraham through Sumeria, Joseph through Egypt, and as we are about to see, is the same here in Babylon. Now the first text from the tablet that we were just reading from, that is in sync and in line with Genesis, was a Sumerian tablet. And just as in Egypt, the way that this was preserved in Babylon were with alignments and logic that ultimately, just as you and I here today, in the moment, simply could not be denied, and because of that timing, because of the happenings, can be regarded to as miracles, such as, of course, ultimately, our every breath. But here specifically, such as direct reflections of Joseph in Egypt, in Babylon, Daniel was exalted. And in once again making old things like new, God itself made sure that this information, this link to the stars, this signature from it itself was preserved. As since the tasting of the fruit in the Garden of Eden, this tending the garden and eating bread by the sweat of our brow, not only took form, literally, as we just saw further proof of earlier, but at this depth, at this level, there reflects a promise kept of the one pure language, a revelation of God itself. And being armed with this knowledge brings all the more grounding to the understanding of the scripture that states that there will be a time where they beat their weapons into, in essence, gardening tools, as we see the direct reflection of what exactly that can mean now, as by the love of God we continue to behold remnants of that pure language, and the origins of that language reflect creation itself in infusing arithmetic, geometry, music, harmony, frequency, sound, and astronomy. The extents of science teaches that the universe began from a single point, perhaps millimeters in size, called the singularity. This completely overlays with teachings from the Kabbalah, which complements the creation held in Genesis for ages now, describing this singular central point of energy. Those four pillars, again highlighting the number 4 itself, as we are bringing together not just the three dimensions of space, but by the grace of God, time itself has come full circle. And within this cycle, we are now able to link the astrophysical and the biological as never before. And in regards to light particles being used as mathematical devices to describe the behaviors of quantum fields, when we take that star number 37 and place it in a mirror, its reflection 73 is also a star number. The number 37, in a self-similar fashion, fractally fitting inside of 73 in their star formation. And when we times 37 times 73, those two stars function as a portal, as a stargate, as a doorway that takes us to the first verse of creation itself. In Hebrew, every letter is infused with a numeral and can be read as sentences as well as mathematical expressions. As 37 times 73 equals 2,701, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And being blessed with being in a place and time where we are able to look back and truly observe what is shown to be a purely productive pattern within the 6 days of creation. As we reflect upon the portrait of what has been a perfectly purposed plan, no matter how seemingly hectic or random things can seem in the moment, where phase 1 is preparation for phase 4, phase 2 was preparation for phase 5, and phase 3 preparation for phase day 6. An orchestration of order which is further displayed within the Book of Formation, also known as the Book of Creation, the Sefer Yetzirah, wherein the calculation of the total permutations of the original 22 characters of our original script, our original human alphabet, equates the modern day computations of stars in the universe. And the fact that we ourselves emit light from ourselves, which ranges at frequencies that mirror those very numbers. This proves all the more the ancient holding that we are a miniature universe. And again, as time itself continues to reveal what is true from what is false, we see now this science proves literally true. An ancient passage held to be shared from my line, that when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light, as now it is known that elements within our bodies originated within the stars themselves. And just as light is held to be in the form of a wave, yet when it is viewed is in the form of a particle, we parallel that reality, being as that we are made up of charged particles and our DNA exhibits a quantum wave form. And just as we are made up of the building blocks that make up all matter, it should bring all the more clarification to the depths of what it means to be made in the image of God. As you are made in its image, its creation, all the things you can see and all the things you cannot see. This world, this universe, its image, and as we are made in its likeness. Once again, when it comes to all the things you can see and all the things which are not visible immediately to you, it that all things came from, and it that is within all things, let alone us, its crown jewel of creation.
What are we waiting for? We're waiting for the revelation of Alt is God. Moses revealed to us that God is Alt. God is all. Means there's nothing else except God. It's all not. But Mashiach, we're waiting for Mashiach to reveal to us that Alt is God. That everything is God.
And once more, the farther the scope of science is able to reach, the more we are able to truly see that in all the ways that it does, God does permeate and in essence shine through and in all things. Orchestration of order in time is continuously revealed everywhere that the scope of modern day science is able to reach. As we see displayed here with a piano, every 7 keys, every 7th note, the frequency increases at a factor of 2, at a power of 2. The same exact sequence which begins the baby's cell. Further fingerprint from the grand orchestrator, God, ultimately, is as the first 7 scales of music and all the notes therein come out to a reflection of the first verse in Genesis of creation itself, wherein here 7 scales with all the notes contained therein come out to the number 28. As in the first verse in Genesis, 7 words with all the letters contained therein coming out to the number 28. And just as we did with the days of creation, and reflect as we are today, when we look back, you will see the geometric sequence within the generations of your very ancestors. And just as we just saw order, design, and purposeful pattern where we may not have been able to surfacely see it or detect it or measure it for a long time as we are now. For example, as we just saw with geometric sequence through frequency. A signature trait of what we are going to show proof is our original language and original script is what is called gematria. And just as in time, even in what may not be surfacely visible, we are able to see the orchestration of organization, of structure, of sequence, and gain further depth of knowledge and understanding when it comes to the composition of communication with our original script. Gematria may also serve to gain further knowledge and understanding when it comes to what may not be surfacely visible, at least immediately. For example, the masterful, elegant artistry displayed in Psalms 23, where we again see a purposeful pattern in composition. We will be seeing other examples of how gematria is embedded with deeper meaning. Within Psalms 23, we see a portrayal of things that can surround one in one's life, be it good or be it bad. Yet in the center of it all, in the eye of what could be a storm, it is with us. As here we see an intentional layout and structure of 26 words on each side of "For thou art with me," in the center of being flanked by 26 words on each side. Now soon we will again go deeper into how the world was of one language, and that language was what we know of today as Hebrew. But first, we'll begin with both modern and ancient evidence that the angels in place and time from Adam and Eve, known as the Greeks, ultimately received their alphabet from the angels known as the Hebrews, and not those angels that were ultimately called the Phoenicians. Once more, on top of modern day research, such as what is referenced here, there are also ancient sources which hold that the origin of the Greek alphabet was directly from the Hebrews. On top of the records of the statements of Eusebius. There are also those from Aristotle, tracing back the timeline of the use of gematria, also called in that time and place isopsephy, where he states the use of gematria is a Pythagorean tradition. And as we trace, match, and align records through history, alignments such as Hermippus, stating that Pythagoras owed all of his theories to the Jews, the Yahudim. And on top of those historic sources, there are also the parallels within the mathematical sciences, as you see some examples of here. Now, just as our original calendar and the pyramid known as the castle serves as proof of the world at one time being of one language, just as it was held in Genesis, we are going to see how mathematical expressions within gematria serve to prove the same, and that original language was indeed the Hebrew, and the script thereof, as you see evidence of here, being what was once called hieratic, meaning priestly, as it was passed to and then passed from Enoch, and that name, Hebrew, stemming from one of the descendants of Adam and Eve, and ultimately of Noah and Emzara, great-grandson of Shem, Noah's son, and the father of Peleg, as it is held that in his time the world was divided from that one language. The original Hebrew, the original 22 characters and numbers infused, and then ultimately the separation of those numbers and characters came in time, as ultimately records reflect. And as we will see more of in this sharing, what originated our scripts, our writing, our language, and built pyramids are far older than what you know of as Egypt, as displayed in the infusion of letters and numbers which can represent mathematical expressions, such as in the first verse of creation, and also embedded within the pyramids themselves. Both Egypt and Babylon did not have pi down to such an accuracy. Egypt, for some time now, accredited by some with the creation of the pyramids, and both Egypt and specifically Sumer have long been accredited with the earliest records of writing. Now, as we'll see later in this sharing, the extents of science today holds that writing began virtually at the same time in both Egypt and Sumer, which again is consistent with Genesis, holding that all the world was of one language. We will also see the quote, hieratic, is not held to be younger than hieroglyphics, and again, hieratic, meaning priestly, is actually the original Hebrew script. The form of the characters used in this display are that of which took place after an exile, but the representation, of course, remains the same. After seeing simply how pi is embedded into the structure of the Great Pyramid, we're also going to see how it is bound to the first verse of Genesis and how pi is interwoven, encoded in that very first verse of creation. Now, the smallest whole number approximation of pi is 22 divided by 7. But we are going to once again turn up the power of the microscope, focus in on the resolution, and zoom in deeper than the relation between the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming the 7 words of creation that represent the 7 days, 7 phases, 7 occurrences that resulted in forming creation, the universe, the world as we know it. Now what we're going to do is in the exact same fashion in which we began. We're going to calculate the numeric values of letters used within the first verse. And specifically, we're going to add together the beginning letter to each of the 7 words in the first verse of Genesis. Now starting with the first letter of the first word, bet, which equals 2. First letter of the second word, also bait, which equals 2. First letter of the third word, aleph, which equals 1. Then of the fourth word, again aleph, equaling 1. Then of the fifth word, hey, which equals 5. Then the first letter of the sixth word, vav, equals 6. And then the first letter of the seventh word, again hey, which equals 5. So the total sum of the initial letters of each of the 7 words is 22. 22, the sum of the initial letters of the first 7 words. And also, in other words, 22 divided by 7 is the average value of the initial letters. 22 divided by 7, the smallest whole number approximation for pi. For those who would be thinking that these types of alignments are coincidence, not only are we about to see further examples of how pi is etched and interwoven within the first verse of Genesis, but after more examples here, you will also see it is sourced that it has been computed that the chances of this happening are 0.005 or 1 in 19,000. Now to even further complete the connection between pi and the first verse in Genesis, we are first going to add up the numeric value for every letter in the word Torah, which in Hebrew is the Bible, can also mean teaching, guidance, direction, or law. Here we're adding together the numeric values of Tav, 400, Vav, 6, Resh, 200, and He, 5. So the complete gematria for the word Torah is 611. So now we're about to see how the numeric value for the Torah, 611, which is in essence a way of saying, expressing Torah in the language of pure mathematics. So now, how that 611 and the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis, that 2,701, are tied into pi. It has been computed that in the mathematical constant known as pi 3.14, the number 3 standing for so many things, such as a start, a process, and a completion, wherein here we are speaking of the first verse of Genesis, the verse of creation. And after the decimal point in pi, if we add together the 611 digits after the decimal point, it has been calculated that that amount comes out to 2,701, directly reflective of the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis. And when it comes to the odds of this coming by chance, computations have reflected a 0.09%. And in further reinforcing the connection of pi in the first verse in Genesis, when we take the number of the letters times the product of the letters, which is the sum of numerals times together, and divide that by the number of the words times the product of the words, we also come out to pi, to at least 4 places after the decimal point. Here we have the sum of timesing 28, as in the 28 letters, by each of their numeric values. And counting that out to 4 decimal places comes out to 6.6886. And now timesing the 7 words times each of their total numeric values comes out to 2.1290. And as we divide those sums, as you're seeing here, it takes the shape of pi out to 4 decimal places. And in further demonstrating that this is no coincidence, also when using small gematria, gematria Ketana, we see a self-similar symmetry with relation to pi. Here we see the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis using small gematria, which comes out to the number 82. And the small gematria of the word Torah, which we saw earlier, was 611, using gematria proper. Using small gematria, it is the number 17. And just as we saw the connection between 2,701, which is the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, and the number 611, which is the mathematical equivalent of the word Torah, the small gematria of that word being 17, when we add together the 17 numerals following the decimal point of pi, it comes out to the number 82, the small gematria of the first verse in Genesis. A mirrored symmetry in self-similar fashion. So once more, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis is 2,701, and the mathematical expression of the word Torah is 611, and 611 digits after the decimal point of pi equates to 2,701. And self-similarly, the small gematria of the first verse of Genesis is 82. The small gematria of the word Torah is 17. And 17 places after the decimal point of pi equates to the number 82. A self-similar reflection to 611 digits after the decimal point, equating to the full gematria of 2,701, the first verse in Genesis. And furthermore, if we begin from the 17th numeral after the decimal point of pi and add together the 611 digits after that 17th numeral, it again equates to 2,701, again highlighting the mathematical expression of the first verse of Genesis. This perfect symmetry reflects both forwards and backwards, with the first 611 numerals after the decimal point equating to 2,701, and the 17 numerals that follow it equating to 82. And in mirrored symmetry, the first 17 numerals after the decimal point equate to 82, and the 611 numerals which follow it equal 2,701. Again, the mathematical expression of the first verse in Genesis. Now, going even deeper, earlier we saw the parallel between the extents of science stating that the universe began from what is called the singularity, which is completely consistent with what has been preserved through Kabbalah as the creation beginning from a central point. In Hebrew, the word point, nekuda, has a gematria of 165. Now we're about to see a very strong, very sweet signature, as 165 is also the gematria of the first two and last two letters of the tetragrammaton, otherwise known as the four-letter name of God. And 165 is the central point of 329, which is the ordinal gematria of the first verse in Genesis. So once more, the extents of science today holds that the universe began from a singularity, which is a central point. The gematria for the word point is 165, which is the central point of 329, the ordinal gematria of the first verse in Genesis. Likewise, mathematically expressed via gematria at the central point of the ordinal gematria of in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is the signature of the four-letter name of God. Moreover, in further tying the mathematical constant known as pi to the first verse of Genesis, when we compute the digits of pi, we see that the 165th numeral, and again 165 being the gematria for point, the 165th numeral, that point marks the beginning of the first time 2701, the gematria of the first verse of Genesis, appears for the first time. Here we see a computation of that fact calculated, as each of you can look up for yourselves. And getting all the more specific with regards to detail, the gematria for the word central, as ultimately the singularity is a central point. That gematria for the word central is 611, just as it is for the word Torah. Adding the gematria for central and point together, central point comes out to 776. Now, starting at the 776 numeral of the digits of pi after the decimal point, the gematria for central point, the 165 digits which appear here in yellow equate to 776, the gematria for central point. And then the remaining 611 digits which appear here in white equate to the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, 2701. As we see a mathematical overlay of the first verse of Genesis and the additional detail preserved through the Kabbalah embedded within the mathematical constant known as pi. Though this should be very obvious that there is nothing random going on here, at least at this point. The odds of this phenomena being random or by chance have been computized, and those calculations reflect that even individually the chances are at least 0 point percentages. And this is individually, let alone taking them all into account. And further connection between the first verse of Genesis and pi is the fact that the first verse in Genesis is made up of 7 words that come out to 28 letters, and the first 7 digits of pi after the decimal point, those first 7 numerals equate to 28. 7 words in Genesis 1:1, 28 letters, 7 digits after the decimal point of pi equate to 28. Take a moment to situate the fact that we just clearly saw how a mathematical constant is directly related, intertwined, and embedded with both an ancient physical structure and an ancient language, which again, all 3 drawing connections to one another. Now, as we continue to see further proof of the original source, which language and the sciences that we know of today stemmed from, here we are going to see how the Sanskrit text, which is known to come later than the hieratic text, or more clearly put, the original Hebrew form of text, as the only other place where you find pi in antiquity is in the Rig Veda, established as fact, came after the hieratic. And again, closer put, in actuality, the original Hebrew. And in further proving that the languages and the mathematics, the sciences altogether, which we have today, all stem from an original source, regardless of what extents some of our technology has blossomed into. Here you see that studies have expressed the relations between hieratic and ultimately Sanskrit. In another sharing, we will get deeper into the connections of the number 32, but in brief, at the moment, it stands out that that display of pi in the Rig Veda is up to 32 digits, and that there are 32 numbers that can calculate every single mathematical constant which are needed to have, let alone the very functions of our universe. Overlay with the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, holding that there are 32 wonderful pathways to which God created the universe. And here, before we move on to further proof of Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, that all the world was of one language, here we see how the formation of the numbering system was preserved throughout the years by the Hebrews. Here you will see proof that the hieratic is actually the original Hebrew characters. When you look it up, you will find that there have been hundreds of archaeological findings of this Hebrew hieratic being used throughout the Davidic kingdom's time period. you will also find that writings by the Zadokite line, which is the line since Aaron, brother of Moses, were also done in this original Hebrew, as well as other scrolls found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as it has been so far in Israel. Not only what has been called the oldest written, quote, religious inscriptions found in these original Hebrew characters, but as you are about to see here, it has been confirmed by experts in this very field that these inscriptions are indeed Hebrew, as you are seeing here. Now, archaeological findings are now proving that, quote, hieratic, that original Hebrew script, did not come after hieroglyphics. And furthermore, as you see here, archaeological findings are proving that ultimately that original Hebrew is also not younger or after the writings in Sumer. Ultimately, here we have a glimpse of the preservation from the original Hebrew through wars and exiles and time itself. Now we'll again take a look at further gematria and mathematical alignments, such as the numerical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis 2701, the 73rd triangular number, the formation of a pyramid, continue to reveal the genius in our Genesis. As Genesis 1:1 and those 7 words consisting of 28 letters, which is the 7th triangular number that foreshadow the outline of the 7 days of creation, mathematically form the last of the original 7 wonders of the world, and is held to be made by the 7th patriarch since Adam, Enoch. Even further miraculous alignments via letters infused with numbers serving as mathematical devices completely aligns the book of Isaiah chapter 19 verses 19 and 20 with the Great Pyramid itself, as every letter equates out to 5,449, which is ultimately the height in pyramid inches up to the capstone summit of the Great Pyramid. This trait of perfect precision is a unique signature as to the gematria being original to the Hebrews, and what was ultimately an imitation of gematria by the Babylonians, called Aru, is renowned to have not been able to be the origin of gematria, as it assigned values to whole words arbitrarily. In other words, the values were just made up for whatever reasons and alignments there were in the moment. Moreover, this degree of intimate knowledge of the pyramid is further proof of it indeed being architected by Enoch. And as displayed here, the accuracy of that scripture being as the pyramid is literally in the middle, in the midst of Egypt. As also Giza can mean border. And as time, by the grace of God, continues to reveal all things, all the more we have the return of that pure language which was promised. And as history continues to become all the more clear, we see how the truth aligns like the stars themselves. As we have accounts of history, such as Abraham teaching astrology amongst other sciences to the Egyptians, and of course accrediting that knowledge to Enoch. There are a number of historic accounts which reflect the same. As ultimately, this information was passed down since Adam and Eve. And as also is consistent with the world at one time being of one language, it is known that through different times and places, Enoch was known by different names such as Thoth, Hermes, Zarathustra, Idris, and Saurid, Enki, as well as Atlas. And though the names may have varied, the preservation of the sciences of writing and also the calendar, the details of which we saw earlier in this sharing, all of this is consistent with the historical record of Enoch. And as Enoch is accredited with passing down the sciences such as mathematics and astrology, as he is also accredited with passing down the architecture of the pyramid, we see that those disciplines are reflected from the pyramids themselves, such as with the alignment of the stars and the fact that there are over 80 mathematical and physical constants embedded within the Great Pyramid. And this is just when it comes to the mathematical constants that have been rediscovered as up to date. And as we know that mathematical constants are the infrastructure of the entire universe, it brings all the more credence to the quote, "As above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul." This has been expressed with the pyramids themselves, being as that, as we saw earlier, the pyramids are capable of physio-electricity, such as our very bodies. This I know, as by the grace of God, I have been blessed with reaching these levels.
In 2002, scientists made the exciting discovery that calcite microcrystals exist on the pineal gland, and that these crystals can interact with electromagnetic fields.
These crystals have piezoelectric properties with excitability in the frequency range of mobile telecommunications. They theorize that the interactions of these crystals with global system for mobile telecommunication waves could constitute a new mechanism of transduction of the pineal membrane. What this means in layman's terms is that our pineal gland is a cell phone. The wireless transmitter that links us with universal consciousness is our pineal gland. In 2002, Israeli researchers made an astounding discovery. They discovered that there's two types of crystals on and in the pineal gland, and that these crystals actually are tuners or resonators that, if stimulated by sound, these crystals have the piezoelectric effect. They release a positive charge. And this is quite amazing.
We will delve deeper into this subject in a future sharing. And as time, by the grace of God, continues to reveal depths of subject matters that we may have thought we already had a grasp on, be it an ancient pyramid, an ancient scripture, or our very own bodies. And in future sharings, we'll further go over how to power the elements within you to reach these levels, though we will touch on one thing that aligns with the scope of this video here soon. The fourth phase of intracellular water takes the shape of a hexagonal structure. Studies within different levels of frequency within electromagnetic fields have also shown that our DNA within those conditions compacts into a hexagon. And once again, there are substantial studies on how the number 37 correlates with our genetic code, both in structure and functions. And the mathematical equivalent for the first verse of Genesis, which foreshadows the account of creation, 2701, forms the 37th perfect hexagon. And as we also know that 2701 is also the 73rd triangular number, we observe here that 6 of those triangles form a hexagon, as in parallel to the 6 days of creation. And just as the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, which foreshadows that 2701, the full sequence of the 7 days, the 7 phases of creation, is the 37th hexagonal number. The number 37 is the ordinal gematria for the word wisdom. And just as 37 also overlays functions and structures of our genetic code, the number 37 added on to the mathematical equivalent of the first verse of Genesis, 2701, equates to the total molecular weight of all 20 amino acids needed to power our cells, to power our bodies. These numbers continue to highlight one another, as 2,738 is 37 times 74, 74 being the 37th even number. And in fractal fashion, in self-similar fashion, one of the depths of being made in the image of God, the two figured numbers, the two star numbers, which are the only two factors of the first verse of Genesis. In other words, the only two numbers when times together equal the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, 2,701. Those two star numbers, which serve as a portal to the first verse of Genesis, the first verse of creation, fit self-similarly one within the other. And all the more highlighting this alignment, 37, on top of being the ordinal gematria of wisdom, is the exact center point of the number 73, the gematria of wisdom. 37 and 73 also mirror one another in regards to their prime number placement, 37 being the 12th prime number and 73 being the 21st. And adding to this unique exclusivity, 12 and 21 also mirroring one another with regard to the prime number placement. 12 squared and 21 squared are also reflective of one another at 144 and 441. 73 is also the 37th odd number. And in further numerical highlight, the reflective number, the mirror of 2,701, is 1072, or 1072, and when added to 2,701 comes out to 3,773, or 3773. And as we look at the 73rd triangular number made by 2,701, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, inside that 73rd triangular number fits the 37th triangular number, 703. And as earlier in this sharing, we saw how creation as captured in Genesis is consistent with the extents of science. As we zoom in the magnification of our modern day microscope into the depths of the beginnings of Genesis, and in the light of thought and technology coming full circle, we live out, we experience depths of the meaning to make old things like new. As we see our origins, thought by some to just have been anciently, poetically placed, now proven. As we look deeper into just how significant the sophistication of the information infused, encoded into the first verse of Genesis. The first verse of Genesis: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, embedded with not only the expressions of mathematical constants, but also in its formation, in its orchestration, as apparent in its most surface sequence of the symphony of sevens within the first verse of Genesis. 4 sevens representing the 4 dimensions of space and time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
How clear can God communicate with humans? Now, if God can communicate a word-for-word sentence, that's awesome. That is a pretty good level of clarity. And if God is all-knowing and more incredibly wiser than the rest of us, you would think that God would know how to communicate with us, his creation, in a way where it should be trivial to communicate a clear sentence.
And in this grand orchestration through time and space, as our technology gets better, we are able to better see, hear, and understand the art that is God's creation, literally, as we see the numbers 37 and 73 etched within the 7th scale of music. And though soon we will be briefly touching on the maps, the calendars, the calculators, the clocks, both preserved and passed down through antiquity, such as the 72 names of God, the table of the Sefer Yetzirah, and the Yi Ying. Here we see it displayed that the 64 famous to the Yi Ying takes a form paralleling 7 scales with 28 notes, just as the musical scales themselves are 7 scales with all of the notes contained therein coming out to the number 28, which overlays the first verse of Genesis, 7 words which are made up of 28 letters. And as we delve deeper into the first verse of Genesis, we see that its orchestration is composed of a symphony of sevens. Modern means to replicate this phenomenon were simply unsuccessful. And now in time, further depths of as within, so without being revealed, just as it is computed that the total permutations of the number 22 equates to the modern day calculations of stars in the universe, as well as there being 22 Hebrew letters, there are ultimately 22 amino acids in 22 pairs of chromosomes within our bodies. And in parallel to Hebrew having a triple root structure, DNA messages are written in 3-letter triplets. and an even deeper correlation, DNA being structured from a basis of 4 and coding in triplets is in parallel to the formation of the 12 tribes of Yisrael in the desert.
The whole book of Bamidbar, the fourth of the books of the Pentateuch, which is called the Book of Numbers in English, is because the beginning of it records the campsites of the Jewish people. Is the way that the campsites, called the Galim, the flags of the tribes, were ordered, and they're reordered. It's a reordering process. They're reordered into 4 triplets. And the whole idea of a camp is that it's all together. It's an army, and the camp is an army. And the army is all operating and functioning together. And the way that it's ordered is in triplets. Each triplet also in time corresponds to the yearly cycle of the 4 seasons. The 4 seasons of the year, that each season has 3 months to it. But this is taking an initial order of the birth of the tribes.
Order and sequence, even when things may appear random or chaotic, is further observed with the birth of the 12 tribes of Israel.
The tribes that were born in an order of doubles, of twos. All of the tribes were born in twos. First Reuven, Shimon, then Levi, Yehuda is 2, altogether it's 4. Then come the 2 sons of Bilhah, then the 2 sons of Zilpah, then another 2 sons of Leah, then the 2 sons of Rachel. The model of the birth of the tribes is twos.
And further revelation of divine order is in how our numeric writing system, based 10, has been expressed in our material reality as a clock, as a calendar, as you see here.
The Kabbalistic model of 10 generations in the form of 10 Sfirot, 3, 3, 3, and 1. And when we reach that 1 at the end, whose name is Noach, then he has his 3 sons. Then, once more, we have 3, 3, 3, starting from Shem. Shem has here 2 functions. First, he's one of the 3 siblings, the 3 sons of Noach, and then he becomes the first of the next model. What does Kabbalah speak of? It speaks of a world possessing 10 Sfirot, 10 emanations, which are 3, 3, 3, and 1. And then we move to another world. A new world altogether that also has its 3, 3, 3, and 1. That's once more exactly the way that it's written in Chronicles. We have Shem and 3 generations, and another 3, and another 3, and finally we reach Abraham at the end.
And just as history can repeat itself, God willing, we see here how the sciences only continue to disprove what is false, and of course prove what is true. As the light of divine revelation continues to disperse, to dissipate any feeling of being left in the quote dark or doubt caused by so-called divine hidden. It is further revealed how a base of 10 is etched within creation itself, as we take the 2 star numbers which serve as a portal to the mathematical equivalent of the first verse of Genesis 2701. Adding together any one of these numbers in single digits equates to the number 10. Also, 2701 equates to the number 10 in the subgroups of thousands, hundreds, and again in single digits. These numbers in fractal fashion continue to self-similarly fit together as the midpoint of 73 is 37, the midpoint of 37 is 19, self-similar star numbers in order and sequence fitting together as we get to 19 with a midpoint of 10. And as a sweet reminder of God's love that serves as an anchor, in particular through times that may not be so good, as you continue to grow through what it is that you are going through. The very meanings of the names of the first 10 patriarchs, their root meanings again an anchor through what may be hard times. Mankind appointed mortality, a fixed dwelling place, the praise of God to rule, to instruct, or to train, one who was sent to be strong, bringing comfort and rest. These foundational treasures of truth serve as a message embedded in our very origins, that especially when one may be feeling alone, as time itself continues to prove that there has been nothing for no reason, and it is with you.
The biggest reason that I'm an atheist is because of crickets, because of divine hiddenness. Because despite what that pastor said at the debate in Vancouver, or Kamloops, I spent a long time sincerely trying to get God to answer anything. My goal was to convince atheists. My goal was to fill out my obligation under 1 Peter 3:15, to be the best representative for Christ I could be, to lead people to the Lord, because that's what I thought He wanted me to do. And every time I came up with a problem, I'd be like, okay, God, I'm stuck. Nothing.
Now, of course, not only having in mind or at heart what we just read over with regards to the root meanings of the first 10 patriarchs, but as we went over briefly at the beginning of this sharing, there is no character biblically held that when looking at his or her history did not have these moments throughout whatever God-given ups and downs and challenges that may have been, as it will continue to be proven that there is nothing without purpose. And now, this being at least the third time where I am stating it is always with us, of course, regardless, reinforcing that all the more is the fact that ancient tables functioning as maps, as calendars, as clocks, as calculators, in their different ways, parallel functions and facts within our very bodies. As the table of the 72 names of God, which you see here at the bottom of this illustration, are 72 keys in triplet forms, just as our DNA sends its messages in triplet form, drawing even closer parallel to the works of our very bodies. The 216 numbers in triplet form which make up the 72 names of God parallel what is held as Metatron's cube, our Merkava having a pattern of 216 numbers, our Merkava being held as a chariot throughout the 4 dimensions of time and space, in its purest depth, representing our very body. As with many challenges that were overcome by those written of biblically, of course, there was not always a table of, quote, divination at hand, as again, these parallels are showing that even these tables parallel the very functions, the very structures of our bodies. The Sefer Yetzirah, holding that God created the universe using 32 paths of wisdom. And not only are there 32 transfer RNAs serving as physical links within our body during the processes of our DNA, but also modern day science counts 32 senses of the human body, the body of the angel. Here we see a depiction of a table famously held within the Sefer Yetzirah of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet placed in a circle with a total of 231 connections between them, as displayed here in form of mathematical formula. And just as there have been many parallels between the 64 codons of our genetic code and the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, in essence, the properties of fractal math parallel the Yi-Yin as it does our very DNA. With fractal properties in its structure, its sequences, and electromagnetic resonance. And here, a demonstration of fractal math.
You take a line and you divide it in half. Take each product of that division and apply that same previous step, and on and on and on into infinity, a recursive pattern.
More, to complete this sharing, it has been held that I, the line of Melchizedek, Metatron, I, the actual line of Christ, has been given 60 lashes. The 216 letters/numbers that are found in Metatron's cube can be broken up into 8 19 columns and 12 rows, each equating to 60.
Apply the Fibonacci clock to a Pythagoras right-angled 3-4-5 triangle. This is absolutely mind-bending. When I add up the values of the three sides, I get A equals 56, B equals 105, and C equals 119. When I square these values, I get A equals 3136, B equals 11025, and C equals 14161. Incredibly, using the Fibonacci clock to create a right-angled triangle, the sum of A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared.
It is now completely clear that those 60 lashes correspond to mathematics and time itself coming full circle, as 6 of these right triangles create a pyramid, such as the mathematical equivalent of the first verse of Genesis. And upon completing this full circle from Eden back to Eden, with the quote modern day information and the revelations that we have up to date, being armed with that knowledge makes the orchestration of order and sequence all the more clear, and ultimately whatever path to bettering ourselves that it is that you are on. And as we see here, the Hebrew script has an infused foundation of base 10. One of the key elements to bettering oneself, a building block to run on optimum, was kept by the first 10 generations of humankind, which is the diet of the angel outlined in Genesis 1:29 and held within the 10 utterances of creation. And as we see here, held through the years by those whom were preserving truth, passed down to them since the beginning. One of the most immediate and grounded factors that can be used as a pathway, as a portal to get you back to Eden is the diet outlined in Genesis 1:29, the true fuel, the true diet of you and I, the angels. Parallel in self-similar fashion to the Sefer Yetzirah, in where it is held that our literally almighty God created the universe using 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10, are the 22 pairs of chromosomes within us, the crown jewel of God's creation. And in its profound precision and practicality, those 22 chromosomes plus our pair of chromosome which determines our sex are immediately accompanied by what is known as the mitochondria. The mitochondria breaks down and processes the energy from the foods that we eat and the fluids that we drink so that literally our cells work properly. For so many years, there are those that have had to walk by faith and not by sight, and it is such a blessed honor to be able to display these revelations that have never been before, such as this perfect blueprint which we are about to go over now, in which how to properly fuel our Merkaba, the chariot in which we ride in which we reside within our literal angel bodies, just as it is held that God created the universe using 22 letters and 10 numbers. Here we see a self-similar overlay in that the 22 chromosomes of our genome, accompanied directly by the mitochondria, which is responsible for fueling our cells, fueling our bodies. Those 22 chromosomes, followed by that mitochondria, is a direct overlay of the 22 letters in which God created the universe, followed up by the encapsulating 10 utterances of creation, in which those 10 utterances directly outline the steps of creation, beginning with Genesis 1:1, and ultimately the 9th utterance, which is speaking of our creation, is immediately followed up with the 10th utterance, being Genesis 1:29, the outlining of the diet of the angel. So to review, directly after the holding of our creation is immediately how to sustain and fuel that creation, which is us, a direct overlay of the 22 chromosomes which make us up, immediately followed by the mitochondria, which is responsible for fueling and powering our bodies. The importance of such a diet is highlighted by the scientific studies which have proven the effects highlighted in Genesis 1:29, turning off genes which cause chronic illnesses and turning on those which prevent them. And for those who are thinking that there are many plants, many herbs, many seeds that are poisonous, of course, having all of the information in context adds to the depths of the verses. As for one, not only does it go on to say, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, but the fact that it goes on to say, except for one, is clear introduction to things such as poisonous plants, fruits, or herbs that were to be in different times and places outside of the garden, as you must also note that it was directly after eating of the fruit where it is then stated that the ground shall be cursed, as you'll see in Genesis chapter 3. The straying away from both the angel diet and the calendar of the angel is well documented in the book of Jubilees, chapter 6, which fills in all the more context to the book of Genesis, in particular here, chapter 9, in the light of this context in Jubilees, along with all of the alignments which we now know, it sheds further light on where it is that we came from and what it is to return back to this Eden. Eating of the original meats and food within what is outlined in Genesis 1:29 has been proven to prevent and correct, indeed reverse, these illnesses, these plagues, as these alignments continue due to the fourth dimension of time aligning with the three dimensions of space, which is also etched in the design of the Great Pyramid. Just as time has shined light like never before on how to erect the temple, which is our very body, in entering this fourth kingdom, that fourth dimension of time, synchronizing with the three of space, as it is continuously revealed that there is nothing outside of God. That signature etched within the fact that the scepter shall never depart from Judah, Yahudah, the fourth son of Israel, Yisrael. Among all else, me literally being son of Joseph, me literally being the line of David, now mark the time to also erect the third temple by the grace of God. And also further proof of the world being of one language as it is held in Genesis chapter 11 verse 1 is the preservation of the term Boricua, which means brave, noble Lord in Hebrew originally. And its preservation is not only a reminder of the angels that came before us that have had to hold brave throughout whatever moments of divine hiddenness. The very preservation of that title and the understanding of it is an anchor, a reminder for us to do the same. And as divine revelation continues to shed light upon what's called the divine hidden, those revelations continue to enrich your reason.